He is the former president of the Human Rights Campaign. He is currently suing the Human Rights Campaign, which is the largest LGBTQ advocacy group. He filed a federal lawsuit, and he claims that he was fired from the organization because he is Black. He was the first Black president of what we call HRC. Mr. Alphonso David, how are you, sir?
Hi there, Clay. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you. There's a few places I want to start. I want to talk about the AG report and the reason why they're claiming they fired you, but I got to begin here. When I heard you started at HRC in 2019, right? Is that accurate?
Yes, August of 2019.
Right. So for folks who may not know, you're a civil rights attorney. You really are an advocate. We've met in passing a couple of times, but I've been aware of your work. And when I heard that you were joining HRC, for folks who may not know, HRC is known to be uber white. I mean, let's be clear, it's known to be lily white, as we might say, lily. And so when I heard you were joining HRC, and you make history, and a lot of people know that HRC really caters to wealthy gay white men. And I said to myself, well, that's not going to work. That's going to be like Angela Davis becoming the executive of Chevron. So, you know what I'm saying? So I was, and I even said, and I say this to you respectfully, why is he even going in that space? I just feel like we don't even need HRC. What's your response to that for a lot of folks in the Black LGBT community who may have been like, we know Alphonso, he does good work. Why are we even going over there? What's your response to that?
We have institutions in this country that purport to represent all of us, but they actually don't. And so if we're going to seize back our power, part of that seizing of our power is to actually deconstruct institutions that hold so much of it. You have the Human Rights Campaign that claims to be the largest LGBTQ civil rights organization in the country. They claim to represent all members of our community. A lot of money goes into that organization, purportedly to represent members of the community, and they were not doing that. And my goal was to really go in and transform that institution into one that was representing the interests of marginalized people. Now, we can create our own institutions, and many have, but we also have to think about, because we can't win the battle only on one field. We have to also think about, how do we look at fields that have not been populated by us, that people look like us, so we can make sure some of those resources are going to be directed and dedicated to members of the Black and Brown community. And that is what I was trying to do. And I went in hoping that I could do that, and unfortunately found myself in a position where the systemic racism in the organization is so deeply rooted that I was tokenized and effectively opportunized for their own objectives.
That word, tokenized. So before you got into the role, before your first day, did you have any concerns, considering HRC's lily history, did you have any concerns that you were going to be a token even before your first day?
Yes. Friends of mine told me, are you sure you want to go and work at the Human Rights Campaign? I had the same concerns about going into government. I had the same concerns about working for other not-for-profit organizations. And I've always thought, how do we actually break down these systems that have excluded us for such a long time, these systems that are supposed to actually represent the interests of our collective community or communities? And I did have concerns. I had friends that told me, we're concerned about you going to work for that organization because we don't really believe that they will do what they claim they want to do. And I have done this work, Clay, for more than 20 years. I have litigated cases all over the country. I've drafted legislation. I've drafted policy on the federal level, on the state level, on the local level. And at every single opportunity I've had, I've seen obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. And if I were to see those obstacles and sort of take another route, I wouldn't have accomplished those things for the communities that need it the most. So I saw this as an opportunity. It was going to be a difficult task. I didn't go in assuming that it was going to be easy, but I did go in assuming that I would have the power to actually do the work that I wanted to do. But I found that the power base of the Human Rights Campaign is really with white, wealthy men. They're the ones that are in the positions to actually make the decisions. And so when you make your decision, they say, yes, well, we're supportive of what you're doing, until they see an opportunity to erase you. And that's what they effectively try to do here.
So just one more thing on this, and then we'll move on. So you were the chief counsel for former Governor Andrew Cuomo. So I totally understand being in government, right? Because government is complicated, Lord knows it is, but you know, it really does affect our lives directly. But how does HRC affect the lives of Black LGBT people? I feel like they have no impact on my life or my friend's life. I feel like it's not like government. So how do they even impact us?
Well, one of the things I was looking to do is make sure that when we think about the electoral system, voting, for instance, right? One of the things that I did during the 2020 elections, working with a team of people, of course, was really trying to figure out how do we get to Black and brown communities that are also LGBTQ that have been disenfranchised. You think of the Black transgender community, or you think of the trans community generally, right?
Yeah.
They try to go in and vote in some parts of this country, and they're told you can't vote because your identification doesn't match with your with how they perceive you. And so they're denied the right to vote. So we went on this campaign to make sure we were reaching out to Black and brown trans people all over the country, gender nonconforming people, to make sure they understood their options, to make sure they were informed about the law, and that they could take advantage of their right to vote. That's just one example. Another is HIV/AIDS. Many people don't know this, but it is a significant problem in Black and brown communities. Many people think HIV is dead, meaning that it's still not killing people, but it is. It's killing people in the Black and brown communities. And 1 out of 2 Black men who's gay or bisexual will get HIV in their lifetime, 1 out of 2. And so when I went to the Human Rights Campaign, I worked with J. Maurice McCants-Persall, who was overseeing the HIV program, to really create additional programs reaching out to the Black and brown community to make sure people knew this is a problem within our community. We have to think about how we can educate young people, make sure they have resources. And so those are some of the things I was doing at the organization, really taking the resources and trying to direct them to programs that were affecting Black and brown people.
So your vision, not that HRC had any kind of impact on the lives of Black and brown LGBT folks, your vision was to go in there and shift the resources to see that it would have an impact, because they do have so much money. That was your vision.
That was my vision.
Okay, I have some radicalism in me, so parts of me like F the system, don't go in the house, you know what I'm saying? But I just want to get your perspective. And again, I want to be clear. Alphonso David, for folks who don't know, civil rights attorney, you've helped to craft criminal justice reform in New York. Like, you've done some really good stuff. So sometimes, just want to make sure folks get that. All right, so let me ask you this. So you were, then we'll get to the lawsuit. So you were named in the AG's report on sexual harassment allegations against former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Again, you were previously the chief counsel for Cuomo's office. In the report, the AG, of course, Tish James, her report accused you of retaining the personnel file of one of Cuomo's accusers after leaving the governor's office, then sharing it with Cuomo staffers. Then it was leaked to the press to discredit one of his accusers. Now, there was some talk that the HRC didn't know that you were still working with Cuomo's office. But I believe, from what I gathered, there was some kind of, they didn't need to know, there was some kind of confidentiality. But I do want to know, did you do that? Did you share that personnel file after you left his office with Cuomo staffers?
So there are a few things that I think I want to make sure we're very clear on.
Okay.
Number one, I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for more than 20 years. I've worked in the private sector, the non-for-profit sector, as well as government. And for every single job, I have retained my files. That is something that most lawyers do. When you work for a client, you retain your files, your electronic files, you have copies of them. And I retain copies of my files. If I worked on legislation, I worked on policy. If there were issues where I counseled an employee, I retain copies of those files. And as Black and brown people, we know in most cases we have to defend ourselves. We can't rely on institutions to do that. So as a Black lawyer, I knew how critically important it was for me to hold on to copies of my files. So that's the first point. Yes, I had copies of my files. Most lawyers do. Second point, the governor's office contacted me asking me if they knew where my old files were. I told them, yes, my files were in my office in a box. You should know where they are. They then contacted me and said, do you have any copies of a memo that they were looking at for? And I said, yes, I have a copy. And I gave it to them. Under the law, I am required to provide documents and information that a former client asked for. Not only is it legally required, but there's nothing improper with doing that. So this idea that, Alphonso David, you provided files to the governor's office. Yes, not only did I provide those files, but I was legally required to do so. And so we've seen this false narrative advance, suggesting that, oh, Alphonso David did something wrong. He provided a file to the governor's office. Yes, I'm not denying I provided the file. I'm telling you I was legally required to do so, and most lawyers would do the same thing.
So yeah, you're right. It's being framed that it was sneaky, that you did it to discredit the victim. So do you believe that Tish James's report, the Attorney General's report, do you believe that they were trying to discredit you and your work?
Well, look, I'm not going to speak to Tish James and her report because I think part of what we're dealing with here is clickbait. We're dealing with mischaracterizations of facts. Many people never read the AG's report. Instead, they read something that someone posted on Twitter or Instagram, or maybe they read an article that mischaracterized the facts. In the report itself, it says that I was not even aware or involved in how that file became public. But that's not written about. Instead, the way it's framed, it's Alphonso David provided a file, yes, but no one ever says that I'm legally obligated to do so. And I think that's a part of why I'm filing this lawsuit, is because the Human Rights Campaign had an obligation to really look behind the veneer, if you will, look at the true facts. They said they would. They said they would issue a report. They never did. And that is no different than what they've done to Black and brown people for years, which is basically hold them out there as, you know, supporters of the LGBTQ community, supporters of HRC, but when they're responsible for actually doing their jobs and holding on to their own values, they don't do that.
So you filed a federal lawsuit against HRC. You're saying that they fired you because you were Black. You were shortly fired after all this came out in September of 2021. So Alphonso, what do you say to people who might say, well, listen, Governor Cuomo resigned, Chris Cuomo lost his job at CNN, Alphonso David got fired. He was just a casualty in the mess of the Cuomo administration, and it wasn't about race. What's your response to that?
Well, it's not that simple, because the Human Rights Campaign has been plagued with instances of discrimination and racism for decades. Many of you may not know, but in 2015, there was a report issued called the Pipeline Report. And in that Pipeline Report, it highlighted that the organization was riddled with racial discrimination and bias. The majority of employees in that organization said that they had been confronted or saw instances of bias. Every single supervisor, senior vice president in the organization said they heard or saw disparaging comments or conduct within the organization. One of the senior vice presidents in the organization used the N-word on 2 separate occasions. Guess what happened to the white leader of that organization at the time? Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah. Nothing. So we have to understand the history of the organization and how it informs the present. And yes, Governor Cuomo resigned, but I'm not Governor Cuomo. I haven't been accused of a crime. I haven't been accused of sexually harassing anyone. And I am a lawyer and operating in the role of a lawyer. So you can't put me in a bucket with everyone else. I'm not going to sort of take the fall for someone else's alleged transgressions. And that is why this is important, right? We've seen this time and time again where we are scapegoated for someone else's transgressions. And I'm not going to be scapegoated for someone else's transgressions when I'm honoring my obligations under the law.
Do you feel like if you were a white gay lawyer at the president of HRC and you did exactly what you did, exactly what's being laid out in the AG report, do you think you still would have gotten fired?
I know I would not have gotten fired. I mean, this is what we call, the cliff, if you will. There's social science research that shows that Black and brown people are usually hired when organizations and institutions are in crisis. And then once we're hired, a different standard applies to us. And I only have to look at my predecessor. I don't have to go that far. I only have to look at my predecessor and how he was treated. Imagine if I was running the organization at the time and someone used anti-Semitic remarks, or someone used remarks that were insensitive to women. Do you think I would still have my job? No, because I'm a Black man in this country. And I think the organization used a different standard than they would have used if I was white. And most importantly, I think here, in addition to their history, all of this happens with Governor Cuomo. I know I didn't do anything wrong. The AG report specifically doesn't say I did anything wrong. I called on the organization to do an independent investigation. They said that they would. They also said publicly that they would be transparent in their findings. They contacted me on Labor Day weekend, asking me to resign. And I said, for what? What did I do wrong? They go through and they start talking about letters that they're getting from some of their donors. I said, that's all fine and good, but you still have to tell me what I did wrong. And they said reputational harm. I said, well, that doesn't help me. You still have to tell me what I did wrong. I asked them for the findings. They refused to give me their findings. 6 months later, they still haven't issued any findings. So I'm stuck in the position where I'm defending myself and from being fired from an organization that has still refused to issue findings. And they call themselves a civil rights organization. How can you be a civil rights organization and you don't embrace transparency and you don't embrace due process?
So one of the things that came up is that you allegedly helped to draft a letter in 2020, and it was described as victim shaming in the report. The letter wasn't published, you didn't sign it, but according to the investigation, if I have this right, you agreed to circulate this letter where others would sign it. You denied that you had circulated this letter, but is this accurate that you helped to draft this letter that wasn't published that was quote unquote victim shaming?
No, that's not accurate. There was a letter that was drafted that was forwarded to me and they asked me to sign it and I said no. There were different letters that were created over a period of time to see where they would shift from actually focusing on one person to focusing on positive experiences that people had within the administration. And what's happened with this sort of negative reporting or false reporting, if you will, is a conflation of the facts. People don't understand or appreciate that an original letter was drafted, not by me, but submitted to me. And they asked me to sign it and I said no, I wouldn't sign it. Why? Because I didn't understand the facts. They were referencing things that I had no personal knowledge about. Then they created separate, different iterations of that letter, which then became a very different letter, not focused on any individual, but instead focused on positive experiences people had within the administration. And that is the letter that I said, well, I certainly had a positive experience. Nothing happened to me. And to put a finer point on it, when I was in the administration, no one ever claimed a harassment. No one, not to me. And no one has come forward today to say that they reported harassment to me. So I had a positive experience. I know all of my lawyers did within the administration. And if people were willing to sign the letter, sure, that's fine. But that was not the original letter. And I think that's a problem that I've been confronting as we sort of operate in this space of clickbaits and very few people actually reading the report, that they conflate information and they conflate facts.
Alphonso, are you saying that the AG report, are you saying that it vindicates you?
I wasn't accused of anything. I don't have to be
Okay.
vindicated. And I think that's,
Okay.
you know, Clay, I think that's part of the problem here. It's I'm a
Sure.
lawyer performing a function, and the AG
Okay.
report outlines what I did. I was not accused of anything in the AG's report.
So I'm sorry. Then let me correct it. Do you do you believe the AG report backs up your story that you did nothing wrong, you didn't try to discredit anybody, there was no victim shaming? Do you believe that the AG report backs up that you didn't do anything wrong?
Correct. I did not do anything
Okay.
wrong. And
Okay.
if I did, someone should tell me what it is. The HRC conducted an independent investigation. What is it, HRC? Where are the findings? So I'm stuck here, Clay, sort of defending what I did, and the organization itself that fired me, it doesn't have an obligation to actually articulate what it is that I did wrong.
So let me ask you this. In part of your lawsuit, it is to be reinstated. Why would you want to work there again?
That is just a
Why?
function of the pleadings. It is not, when you file a breach of contract action, part of the
Okay.
pleadings is a seeking reinstatement. Look, what I'm looking for here is a change in culture. What I'm looking for here is HRC being held accountable for using different standards for Black people and brown people and different standards for white people. I'm looking for this organization to be held accountable. You should know that when I filed this lawsuit, 3 other Black and brown men came forward and said that this organization is rife with racial discrimination and bias. What did the organization do? Again, investigate, say that they will look into these issues? No. Instead, they decided to attack me. They came up with a media plan to attack me. But to this day, they have not addressed the issues of systemic discrimination within the organization. So even if you put my complaint aside just for a minute, what about all of the other Black and brown people that are saying that the organization is rife with racial bias? What about them?
Just to be clear, though, Alphonso, so you're saying you don't want to be president of HRC again. That was just part of the law. Do you want to?
Look, it is not, it's a function of the pleadings. That's why it's in there. I'm not looking to run this organization again in a real way.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
It's just a function of the pleadings. What I am looking for is accountability from this organization.
Do you think Andrew Cuomo, Governor Cuomo, should have resigned?
That I knew at the time, the answer is yes. I can tell you now that new facts are being discovered every single day. And I don't have enough information to know what happened. I wasn't there. I don't know there are 11 complainants in the AG's report. I know one of the 11. And I don't have any information. I have no background. I wasn't there. No one reported anything to me. And as a lawyer, I think that before rushing to judgment and saying someone should do something versus something else, I have relied on the facts. And so I relied on the AG's report when it came out, and I publicly said the governor should resign. And that's what I believed at the time.
Do you think that Chris Cuomo should have been let go of CNN?
I don't have enough information about what happened there. I don't know what the basis of their decision was. I don't know what conversations they had. I don't know what representations he made. And so I don't have enough information to opine on that.
Gotcha. So where do you go? Where does the Black LGBT community go moving forward? Again, like I said at the start of the interview, I'm not really all that concerned about the HRCs. Do we feel like we need those communities in solidarity, or I feel like there are so many great Black LGBT folks who have more power, who are doing more work, doing more grassroots work. Uh, do we need communities? Do we need an organization like HRC that we know is rife with tons of issues going back many years?
I think what HRC is showing us with their very response to this complaint and all of the claims by other Black and Brown employees is that maybe it's time for a new organization that actually represents the interests of all members of our community, because it's clear that they don't. And I don't have to file, it shouldn't take me filing a lawsuit to force this organization to face the problems within the organization. And you're right. I mean, there are other organizations that do great work. Native Son, National Black Justice Coalition, Color of Change.
Yeah.
There are other organizations that do fantastic work. And so I think as I ruminate on this lawsuit and the implications of this lawsuit, I've also thought about maybe it's time for us to go somewhere else, as opposed to thinking that the Human Rights Campaign actually will represent the interests of Black and Brown people.
You know, I don't like the term cancel culture. I don't really like that term at all. I believe that rich, famous people really can't be canceled. But you're not on the level of some famous, iconic pop star. Do you feel like you've been canceled?
That's such a great question. You know, I don't think personally that anyone has the power to cancel me or anyone else. I think that we're all put on this planet by God to do something. And that something is very different depending on who you are. I don't believe that someone else has the right to tell me what my power is given to me by God to affect change on this planet. We live in an environment, though, where many people feel that they do have that power to cancel someone, to affect their livelihood, to affect how they live, to affect their opportunities in the future. And to that extent, you're correct, because so many institutions now are focused on what people are saying in social media, and what they say on social media informs how they conduct themselves. So my core function in this life, to affect meaningful change in the lives of marginalized communities, will not change. No one has the power to change my mission in life. But the idea of cancel culture and how it affects my ability to affect my mission or to advance my mission has been impacted. And I'm not, as you say, rich and famous, so that I can overcome those obstacles as easily as some may have overcome them. But I will, because my mission is too important and I won't be deterred from it.
I hear you. I hear you. I want to thank you for coming on, and I want to thank you for making it clear. You're right. A lot of people, they just read the article, even from a reputable outlet, and they think that's what it is. They don't. I mean, some of the folks in Congress won't even read a bill. So you know what I'm saying? It's just they won't even read an actual bill. They don't even know what's in the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. So yeah, I want to thank you for coming on and clearing these things up. And I really wish you the best. And I just think at this point, I've just been so disenchanted with so many, to be frank, white LGBT organizations since I was, a teenager. I just don't feel like they give a damn and they care about their wealthy white gay male donors. So there's a lot of intersections here. And that's why I try and tell people as we're in Black communities that don't think that we as Black LGBT folks don't experience racism. Don't think that. It just, that doesn't erase it just because they happen to be LGBT. So anything else you want to leave us with, Alphonso?
Thank you. I just want to say thank you. Thank you. Thank your listeners for paying attention, for seeing what's happening, and for not being deterred from, I think, what our ultimate goal is, which is liberation. We're not liberated as Black and Brown people. And that's a word that I started using when I was at HRC, liberation. And I had board members ask me, what does liberation mean? And what's interesting now is they're trying to use it in their written materials. but they had no idea what liberation was. We have to fight for true liberation as Black and brown people. And I just appreciate you doing this show. I appreciate people listening, and thank you again.